love you back. That starts. But if you love me, you got to help me pass this bill. If you love me, you got to help me pass this bill. It starts with your help.
That was 2 of the 24 times President Obama called on Congress to pass this bill in his 19-minute speech at North Carolina State University in Raleigh today. The president spoke to more than 9,000 people packed into the school's un-air-conditioned field house. The fired-up crowd was a bright spot for the Obama White House today. So, too, is a new poll that shows support for the American Jobs Act. The new CNN opinion research poll shows 43% of people support the proposals in the American Jobs Act, while 35% oppose them. The individual proposals in the president's jobs bill poll even better. 58% support cutting the payroll tax for businesses. 64% support federal spending to build and repair bridges, roads, and schools. 65% support extending the payroll tax holiday for employees. 74% support providing federal money to states to hire teachers and first responders. That last proposal, federal spending to hire teachers and first responders, is popular with voters across the board. Men, women, whites, non-whites, under 50, over 50, attended college, no college, Democrat, Independent, Republican, liberal, moderate, conservative, urban, suburban, rural, southern, Midwestern. Every single category of voters supports that proposal, except one category of voters. The voters who support the Tea Party. 55% of voters who support the Tea Party oppose giving federal money to states to hire teachers and first responders. And, of course, so do Republicans in Congress. Joining me now is Austan Goolsbee, former chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. He's now a professor of economics at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Thanks for joining me tonight, Austan.
Great to see you again, Lawrence.
Austan, I think this is one of the perfect examples of how good policy that can really have the effect that's intended makes good politics. When you look at the support numbers for the individual components of the bill in that poll, it's really quite extraordinary. Is there a way to translate that support for individual components? This is something we saw in the health care legislation, too. Individual components of the bill had much more support than the overall legislative package. Is there a way to translate that kind of support into momentum legislatively?
You know, I certainly hope so. That's got to be the challenge the White House has, is just to get out the door and into people's heads what's actually in the bill. Because, you know, the environment in Washington is so partisan and poisonous just because one side's saying it's Obama's jobs bill. You got some group of people saying, oh, well, then they're against it. But I think if you start looking at the components do make a lot of sense. And I would just wish everybody on all sides would take a step back and just the economy's in a serious spot. We've got the events in Europe are really scary. We've taken some heavy blows this year. We were growing fairly well in 2010. 2011, we've slowed down a lot because of these things that we can't control. We got to do something. And this isn't a game. So I hope people can try to get out of the gamesmanship mentality. And if it's some parts of that, I hope it's the whole thing. I mean, I think what's in that package strikes me as makes a lot of sense.
Now, the front runner in the Republican primaries right now, Rick Perry, just blithely at Republican debates, as he did the other night, just says the president's stimulus package, the Recovery Act, created 0 jobs. That's his number, 0 jobs. What's the response? What's the Democratic response to that doesn't sound like an economics professor talking? And I'm going to ask an economics professor to give me the English language campaign response to that.
I mean, one is we could go back and try to get the data and look at 2.5, 3 years ago what was happening. We're losing 800,000 jobs a month. we turn that around. We come out of a deep hole. There's every reason to think that these nonpartisan, whether it be the Congressional Budget Office or the private guys who strongly disagree with Governor Perry, are correct. But in some sense, I don't think we should do that. Rather than argue about what or how successful these programs were 3 years ago, why not acknowledge that we're in a different moment? Look, at that moment, when the president takes office, the data now shows that's the worst 6 months in the 64 years that we've had data. And there wasn't a private sector that you could turn to. You couldn't say, well, let's have some tax cuts and hope that the private sector does it themselves, because at that moment, the government was the only choice there was. Now we're in a different moment, but it's still a scary moment. I mean, we've slowed down. The job market is we still got a very high unemployment rate, and you've got these ill winds blowing from Europe. We had the events in Japan, and we've had oil prices. The question of what we should do now, I think, is those aspects that could help the private sector stand up. You saw the president in his speech outlined a bunch of those: tax cuts for 150 million workers, tax cuts to the employers, tax cuts for investment, and then let's rebuild the infrastructure of the country. I mean, somebody told me that 20% of the bridges in John Boehner's own district were rated as either about to fall down or something, whatever was the lowest category. I mean, it's across the country. You can get 14 kinds of coffee, but you can't get to the coffee shop without driving through a pothole. I mean, that's a mess.
I just want you to listen to one more thing that the president said today when he was talking about the Republicans and their attitude, their political attitude toward this bill. Let's listen to what the president had to say.
Some of them were even quoted as saying, even if they agreed with some of the things in this bill, that they don't want to pass it because it would give me a win. Give me a win? Give me a break. We're in a national emergency. We got folks who are purposely dividing, purposely thinking just in terms of how does this play out in terms of this election.
Well, he doesn't sound like an economics professor there. National emergency, is that the level that the president has to go to in order to get voter attention here?
Yeah, look, he might. I think it is a national emergency. I mean, how could you not view it as an emergency? And then you look at all this stuff happening around the world. I mean, there are a lot of big problems. We've got to get the economy growing. If the president's right and there are people saying that, those people should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, when the unemployment rate's 9%, to be thinking, well, yes, I think that would help the economy, but let's not do it anyway. That's just sad.
I'd hate to think we live in a country that only recognizes the emergency when the bridge actually falls. Austan Goolsbee, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Hey, great to see you again, Lawrence.